Brahmani Udbijat Jatinam Yaiva Yatnastu Samvritaha Kishas Masru Nakani Yasha Shila Loha Bravidjutam Brahmani Udbija Jatinam Yaiva Yatnastu Samvritaha Keshas Masru Nakani Yasha Shila Loha Bravidjutam. So word for word is Brahmani, hairs on the body. Udbija, vegetables. Jatinam, of the kingdoms. Yai, by which. Va, because the word is yai in the trend, it's not yair, it's Y-A-I-H. Va, either. Yagna, sacrifices. To, but. Sambritaha, particularly served. Kesha, hairs on the head. Smashru, facial hair. Nakani, nails. Asya, of him. Shila, stones. Loha, iron ores. Abra, clouds. Vidyutam, electricity. So I'll read the translation and we'll repeat. The hairs of his body are the cause of all vegetation, particularly of those trees which are required as ingredients for sacrifices. The hairs on his head and face are reservoirs for the clouds, and his nails are the breeding ground of electricity, stones, and iron ores. Please repeat. The hairs on his body are the cause of all vegetation. Particularly of those trees which are required as ingredients for sacrifice. The hairs on his head and face are reservoirs for the clouds. And his nails are the breeding ground of electricity. Let me say that again. His nails are the breeding ground of electricity, and then it's stones and iron ores. So it's all one thought. His nails are the breeding ground of electricity, stones, and iron ores. So, I'll read it again. The hairs on his body are the cause of all vegetation, particularly of those trees which are required as ingredients for sacrifice. The hairs on his head and face are reservoirs for the clouds, and his nails are the breeding ground of electricity, stones, and iron ores. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
The polished nails of the Lord generate electricity. The clouds rest on the hairs of his head. One can therefore collect all sorts of necessities of life from the person of the Lord, and therefore the Vedas affirm that everything that is produced is caused by the Lord. The Lord is the supreme cause of all causes. So, just like in the previous verse, with the previous two verses, there's similar kind of things. We just read. Yeah. His eyes are the generating centers of all kinds of forms, and they glitter and illuminate. His eyeballs are like the sun and the heavenly planets. His ears hear from all sides, and receptacles for all the Vedas, and his sense of hearing is the generating center of the sky and all kinds of sound. His bodily surface is the breeding ground for the active principles of everything and for all kinds of auspicious opportunities. His skin, like the moving air, is the generating center for all kinds of sense of touch and is the place for performing all kinds of sacrifice. The hairs on his body are the cause of all vegetation, particularly of those trees which are required as ingredients for sacrifice. His hairs on his head and face are reservoirs for the clouds, and his nails are the breeding ground of electricity, stones, and iron ores. So again, this is a description of this universal form, a poetic description of the universal form that we are presently, is all around us and is everything. And, actually, if you think about it, that particular, the form of Krishna that's in the material universe, there's Garbhodakshaya Vishnu at the bottom, he's very large. But the form that we're talking about, the universal form, is the all-pervading Paramatma. And he's only 9 inches. He's only 9 inches in our heart, and he's in everything. 9 inches. So that form of Krishna, Vishnu, is the form that's supporting this entire, making all these things happen, these things that we're describing here. It's just 9 inches. And a verse that's about to come up in the purport, Prabhupada refers to the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the last 2 verses in that, which I don't remember verbatim, but is all of these opulences and this whole material creation, the entire material creation, is just a fragment of my opulences. It's insignificant to him. It's just, we think it's just absolutely amazing and incredible how it's all working. But yet, it's so tiny. Yeah, I heard something the other day. What was it? Somebody was talking about floating something in the sky. What was it? It was something very small. And they were so amazed that, oh my God, they floated this thing into the sky. And, like Prabhupada always used the example of, the satellites that they put up. And they think this is a big accomplishment. And they fall down eventually. But nobody thinks about these huge planets that are floating. And they're moving so rapidly. And yet we don't feel them. But in any case, all this is there. And we can go on discussing this, and we will go on discussing it. But right now, this time of the year, this time of the season, this is the time, in most places in ISKCON, they're gearing up for the marathon, book marathon. And repeatedly here, we're hearing about sacrifice. And the book marathon is a sacrifice. Just like the Karmis, they're having a big marathon right now. And it's called Black Friday. And that thing seems to go on forever. And it's a marathon for, accumulating more useless toys and sense gratification. And people will stay up very late and do great austerities to get there and be on time. And now it's even to the point where it's not just that day, Friday. They're talking about even on Thursday. I was asking the people at work at Walmart, when's the best time to avoid the crowds? And I said, what about Thursday morning? Oh, no, that's last minute shoppers.
No.
And I said, well, what about later in the day? Oh, that's people come for the early part of Black Friday. So it leads into that. So unless you get there when they're exhausted on Saturday, but by that time everything's gone. So hopefully there'll be some fruits that I can pick up or something. Because I was there for a few minutes on Monday, and it was awful. People are they get in this sense of frenzy, yeah, and you can tell that they really, it's like that pressure is on them now that they got, I have to enjoy this. This is right. I have to be. We're all going to enjoy, right? We're going to enjoy, right? We're going to be happy, and they put so much pressure on themselves, and it always ends up in, when I was sitting in the hospital yesterday waiting for Colleen to do her thing, and they had this cooking show on. It was just gross, disgusting. And what they were making and the way it looked, but they were just all talking about how to avoid family conflict while at the Thanksgiving dinner. And so that's the whole, we all know it's coming. So,
is that put him at the kid table?
Yeah, I was actually thinking you could do, like, I was thinking about like doing a skit where you do this thing where you have like, okay, so here's the talking points for the day, and you have this, what we can talk about, and then don't go Joe about this, and then, just have like a whole, line it up, and these will be our talking points, and everybody sit there, and no one can not say anything outside those talking points. But what the devotees are talking about right now, in the mornings I've been getting a chance to listen to some of the classes in Europe, and especially in London right now, this is the 50th anniversary of the opening and installing of Radha London Ishwar, and the story behind that, those deities and how the devotees got those deities, and that's legendary. It's an amazing pastime with devotees in Prabhupada. So that's going on there, but then also in the manner they're talking about book distribution. And you hear so many amazing stories, so many quotes from Prabhupada's letters. And this book distribution is a mystical experience. If there was one quote from a letter, I don't remember it verbatim, but it was something to the effect that Prabhupada was saying that I'm not interested in becoming known as a famous author. I'm not interested in how much money we collect. I'm simply interested in making sure this knowledge gets out, these books get out to the people, because this is what's going to save all of their lives. And there's so many wonderful stories. There was one story where this Mataji, she was originally, I didn't catch the whole thing, but she was a book distributor in Chicago, and she must have married someone from England or something, because in 1979 she moved to England and is still there. And she was a book distributor in the Chicago airport, so I imagine that was a very, that's legendary. The Chicago airport was really, there was some very intense encounters with the devotees and the people that worked there. Each airport had its own personality, and like the Atlanta airport, we had certain obstacles to overcome. But Chicago, there were fistfights. There were, you had to be. It fit the personality of Chicago, the whole rough and tumble Chicago personality. So she was distributing there, but then she went over to England, and she was talking about all the different disguises that she used to put on to get into the airport. In those days, you could get into airports, and she had 4 different disguises that she would take. And when she was distributing on the streets, the laws are different in England. They don't have the Constitution. We barely have it now. But the First Amendment, the right of free speech and religion is what we took shelter of. But there, the law that they would arrest them, that they would accuse them of breaking is obstructing traffic. Sometimes we would get that also. It's like type of loitering. And so they would get arrested. They go out, and every day they get arrested, and they go to jail, and then they plead guilty, because that was easier, just paying a small fine. And then they go back out and do it again, and get arrested again. And it was a cycle. But they were really dedicated to it. It was a whole movement. But she was telling this one story where this one devotee, who was an English devotee, who was one of the main organizers of book distribution there. And at a certain point, he wanted to have like a spiritual vacation and maybe open up a new place. And he decided on Iceland. And it was an unusual choice, but he had a good, he'd done some reference in it and research, and it made sense, because they have these 6 months of day, 6 months of night, and there's hardly any television. So this country, there's more books bought and read. The people there are avid readers. So he thought, this is the perfect place to go. And it turned out to be fairly successful. But the interesting thing was, he met this person named Oscar. And he became totally, Oscar was really interested in reading Prabhupada's books and wanted to help in any way he could. And so then he made an arrangement with, I forget the devotee's name, something like a mint or something like that. But he said, you ship books over here and I will store them for you. And so they made this arrangement. And then, so there was a whole warehouse of books in Iceland. And Oscar had it. So then this Mataji that was talking, a few years later, she wanted to go. And she couldn't get in touch with that particular devotee to get in touch with Oscar to get those books, because the idea was that the books will be there when you want them, and that way you don't have to ship them over. So, but they didn't care. They just, it was one of those moods like we'll just rely on Krishna, we'll just depend on Krishna, and so and they didn't really know what to expect. They just could figure, well, they brought some books with them, and they'll just sell those, and maybe we'll find Oscar or something. I don't know what they were thinking, but she's on the plane, and the man sitting next to her was he was like Oscar's best friend, or his uncle. He was friends with Oscar's uncle. He said, "Oh, I know Oscar. Yes, he's a good friend of mine, and or he's my nephew or something." I don't remember all the details of it, but the long and short of it is that just by going out like that and doing it, they connect with it and they get access to the books, all of those books that were required. And there was some, preaching center set up for a while. I don't know what the end result was, but it just shows you the determination to go out, because Prabhupada had explained that he saw in Bengal how the communists had spread communism in Bengal, and Bengal up until recently was a communist state. Not the same type of communism, like a totalitarian form of communism, but it was communism nonetheless. And even up to recently, the ruling party was communist. So he's and plus also all of his instructions from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj.
Yes.
So he said something to the effect that just those 26 metal pieces of the printing press with the letters, they changed Bengal into a communist country, and he was convinced that by distributing these books and getting this knowledge out, that we can create a spiritual revolution. And that's what Prabhupada wanted to dedicate his life, is that he did dedicate it, staying up all night. He actually at some point in his life changed his daily schedule. I was listening to another devotee talking about this, that he was determined to get these books translated, and he knew he had to basically, if not give up sleep, at least minimize it. So he would stay up very late and try to discipline himself so that he could start, and this was like in the 50s and so on, that he started to translate or write articles for his Back to Godhead. And then his Back to Godhead distribution was also a great sacrifice. We're talking about sacrifice. Here it's talking about the trees for sacrifice. And in that sense, the trees are what are used to print books, because that's where the papers are coming from. So the trees are involved in sacrifice, and in Prabhupada's sacrifice, and in Lord Chaitanya's sacrifice, to print these transcendental books that are not books, they're transcendental sound vibration and transcendental knowledge. And he gave up his family, his business, and then we know that he was regularly going from Vrindavan into Delhi, which was an extremely difficult thing to do. When you're in Vrindavan, in that particular situation, it's a very calm and spiritual atmosphere, especially then. It isn't like it is now it wasn't didn't have this influence of all these Western devotees coming. It was a very quiet, rural setting, and he had a nice situation in our temple. But he wanted to do something for his spiritual master, so he would go into Delhi and print the Bhakti Godhead and start personally going around in the town, in the city of Delhi, which is not a very pleasant situation, and the air is quality is very bad. A couple of times he experienced heat stroke, but he was determined to get something started. And then he felt that his spiritual master was speaking to him through an elderly woman or an elderly gentleman. Why are you doing all this just for these magazines? Why not do it? Why not distribute books? And he became more inspired to continue his translating work of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he would take the train into Delhi and spend long hours out in the hot sun trying to distribute these books. And then he made all his efforts to come to America, and we know what he experienced on that trip across the ocean to come here, and how he lived in the worst parts of in New York. And then he lived with the hippies on Haight Street. These were, at that time, that place was really crazy. The devotees that were there described what a bizarre situation is. And even George Harrison, he went one day in 1967 in the Summer of Love, and he was expecting to see like a very bohemian type, creative people with cottage industries, and he said it was just a bunch of dirty kids that were, didn't know what they were doing, and he was very, very put off by it. And here's Prabhupada in the middle of all that, and he didn't mind it at all. I heard recently Malati and Shamsundar and Gurudas talking about their experiences with Prabhupada in those days, and they were saying that Prabhupada would say, "No, I'm a Calcutta man, and if you've ever been to Calcutta, you'll know that these places in Calcutta, those streets in Calcutta, the traffic in Calcutta, it's really." It's not even from someone that grew up in New York. That you have ox carts, you have motorcycles, you have bicycles, you have pedestrians, you have buses and trucks and diesel fuel, and no one is following any traffic signals. It's just all for one, and that one is you. Just whoever has the loudest horn. They have the right of way. So Prabhupada put up with a lot to give us an opportunity to finally understand who we are and what is our purpose of life, and gave us the process for this particular age of Kali Yuga to get out of it. I guarantee, like I was just recently listening to Raswaj told me some of Laj's experiences down at the flea market. Apparently she's got Bhagavad Gita's along with her jewelry. And this one elderly gentleman, Raswaj was telling me, 75 years old, and he said, I studied this book, the Bhagavad Gita, when I was in high school or college. And now he was so eager. I've been looking for this book. If I remember correctly, I would wish he was still here, but I've been looking for this book, and he just immediately just gave her a donation for the book. And another woman, she said, for 3 years I've been looking for the Bhagavad Gita. So she's just there with the Bhagavad Gita, and people who have been looking for it are coming to her. Super Soul is sending them. So, the reciprocation is there. It doesn't matter how many books we do and how much Lakshmi there is. The point is making the attempt to assist Srila Prabhupada in some way, whether it's even just here now talking about it and getting people to appreciate what the effort that Prabhupada went through and his early disciples, what they went through to get these books distributed. The amazing stories of book distribution that are legendary, and how many people's lives have been changed. I personally became a devotee because of the Krishna book, because the devotees insisted I take it, and and then eventually I read it, and then Prabhupada came to New York after I finished reading it, and then that was the end of that. I immediately. As soon as they told me, now you have to sell these books, I was ecstatic about it. Because that book changed my life. It was like nothing else. I completely was convinced I was giving up everything for this. And that mood that Srila Prabhupada and those early devotees, and devotees still have today, that mood, that this, it all starts with Narada Muni. There are many beginnings, but there's a pastime with Narada Muni who comes to Krishna and tells him that Kali Yuga has begun down on earth, and there's no hope for them. The men are being completely overcome by their senses, and they become spiritually lazy. There's no hope, and the Lord then begins to realize that he has to give them another chance. So he comes down personally and shows us how to be a devotee. And his prayers are so beautiful. He's praying that I just want to be a dust particle. I mean, we already are smaller than a dust particle. We're 1/10,000th the tip of a hair, so we're smaller than a dust particle. And Lord Chaitanya himself is praying like a true Vaishnava. I want to be like a dust particle at the feet of a Vaishnava. I want to experience just the mercy of serving at the lotus feet of the devotees. And this is the highest opportunity right now in this age, is to be a part of this movement in some way. To take up this mission and meditate on the sacrifices that have been made by Srila Prabhupada, all the previous acharyas, and all of the devotees before us, how much they have done. You listen to these stories of these devotees in New York and in San Francisco, and then Prabhupada sends some of them over to London, and they had nothing at all. And it was very difficult to get into London at that time, because they didn't want any hippies coming in. So it was hard, and they didn't even live together. They had 3 different apartments, the 3 couples, Mukunda and his wife, and Gurudas and Jamuna, and Malati and Shyamsundar. They all had, and they would come together occasionally. They had no plan, no nothing. They just knew that Prabhupada said, go there and start a trend. And they did everything they could to do that. Their first Rath Yatras, the way they built them, the way Lord Jagannath came to our movement. It's such an amazing story. It's all, and these people, they just gave everything to Srila Prabhupada, and not even knowing that Lord Jagannath, this form here is God. They accepted that immediately. They did everything for him, building Rath Yatra carts, holding Rath Yatras, giving up their families, giving up everything to help Srila Prabhupada establish this movement, to help Prabhupada organize a process for printing the books and distributing these books. So I've been just meditating on it a lot recently. I'm sure some of you may even have some stories about book distribution. Maybe some of you would like to share some of your stories about book distribution. Does anyone have any stories they'd like to tell us about book distribution? No? Okay. Anyway, I think I'll end here. So, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, and all glories to Srila Prabhupada's books. And those...
Prabhu?
Yeah?
I just have one story from Mahanasini.
Good.
That we were out just selling hats, and Mahanasini we were just starting to do books with our hats. And Mahanasini had, for some reason, moved off of Bourbon Street and went to Jackson Square area. And she was by the Cafe du Monde. And she was selling some hats and then gave some books. And this one man started screaming at her. And he was screaming at her so intensely, I mean, he wouldn't leave her alone. Usually you can take some, you're tolerant to some degree, but this man really wore her down. And so she came up to Bourbon Street where Haridwani and I were working. And we're like, no, it's okay, Bhante, just, stay with us, strengthen numbers, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. And the next person she put up was a local lady, and the lady gave her a $100 bill. And Mahanasini said, wait 1 minute. And she ran over and grabbed the Bhagavad Gita and put that Bhagavad Gita right in that lady's hands.
Wow.
And I was just thinking, wow, she is so determined, that this man was just screaming crazy at her. Normally, like I would have been shook up. I might not have sold, put another book in someone's hand the rest of the day.
Right.
But without hesitation,
Right.
she just put that book.
That's the thing about the book distributors. You have to really respect what I was listening to one devotee whose thing was saying that, and even the woman that I heard in the Manor, and she was a seasoned book distributor. She said even now, although now she's working with the Gokula there near the Manor or something, and she said even now when I go out on the street, there's still an element of fear. But there was one devotee who was a new bhakta, and he was saying, now a lot of these brahmacharis that come through, they're just selling at mainly at colleges, it seems like. And he was with a seasoned book distributor, and he was just watching, observing, and he just noticed that, he didn't care about rejection. He just kept going. I mean, he never allowed. So he said that he described how he then tried to do it, and he went like an hour or 2 hours just being rejected. And he went back to his van, and he's like, really, he said, I can't do this, I can't do it. And then the older devotee explained to him, no, you just have to keep trying, you just have to be determined. And sure enough, he goes back out. Shortly after that, he does do a book. And then he realized, there is reciprocation, and Krishna will reciprocate. And there was one older devotee back when we first were really getting into book distribution in the early 70s. One devotee told us you should be like a bee. If you study a bee, he goes from flower to flower to flower and looking for pollen. He doesn't get upset. He may go for 20 minutes, and then for a bee, that could be like, half of a third of his life. I don't know. And he doesn't get anything, but he just keeps going till he finds the honey.
They only live 6 weeks. You're right.
6 weeks. So they go, but they just go from one flower to the next to the next. Don't be affected by it. It actually, it's false ego. But they're, that, and I specifically remember when this all first started, we started getting these. Initially, when I joined, we were doing Harinam, and we were passing out Back to Godhead magazines. Very rarely, there was hardly any books at all. And then we started getting these letters from the West Coast, and it was Buddhimanta and Keshava. I think they were in San Francisco, and they were doing door-to-door Krishna books, and they were selling them. And so Rupanuga was the president of Brooklyn at the time. We had a big ISKCON, and everybody's like, now we have to start taxing our brains on how to distribute Krishna books. For me, I had just come because of the Krishna books, so I'm thinking, yeah, sure, no problem. I'm into this. Because it was like when you say you just found out about a new band and a new album, and you want to share it with everybody or something like that, or a good restaurant. For me, that book was like the most beautiful experience, the best park, place to go for a sunrise or sunset. This was it. I wanted to tell everybody about it. So, but we would just go to colleges and sit down in the lobbies. You talk to somebody for 10 minutes, you talk to somebody for an hour or 2 hours. But, the idea was to sell, to get them to buy the book. And there was many experiences I had, that just I couldn't make. One time I was sitting in the van with 4 or 5 other devotees, and we were told just to sit there and wait while Sankirtan leader, I think it was Romapad, and he was going into. We were going to have a program. We were doing a lot of programs at the colleges with a kirtan, a play, prasad distribution, a lecture. And so he was making the arrangement. We went around to like 3 colleges a week. In the New York, Connecticut vicinity, New Jersey, there's so many colleges. I mean, and so we were doing that. We had a program all the time. It was great for a brahmachari because you could steal a lot of halva. Yeah, I would come back sometimes with like half a pot. It wasn't just for small stuff. We went for the pots, we're supposed to just sit in the van, and I'm thinking, hell, I'm going out there. And I just started talking to people and that were walking by in the parking lot, and I saw the Krishna book. This was one of the first days after the big pep talk to do it. And I think, well, why are we sitting here? Nobody else was thinking about it. I just jumped out and did it. I couldn't wait to tell someone about it. Because everybody else, all my friends, I tried to tell them about it, and they thought I was crazy. I figured there's got to be somebody else who can understand this. So I come back in, and I was like a hero. It was amazing. And so for about a month, I was the #1 distributor in Brooklyn. I was doing about 10 Krishna books a week. This was big. Talavana came up to me, who later became a really big distributor. She said, how do you do it? How do you do it? And I, just told her a few things. But I was amazed. She was asking me. But then, later on, it became, like I'll tell you, there was other types of things with book distribution. Like, for instance, at the Smoky Mountains, the national park there, where they actually, one of the rangers one year took a Bhagavatam, put it on the wall, and the Gokula was there. I forget this guy's name, this ranger's name. He was a real, God, he was a piece of work. He was like a character from the heat of the night or something. But, and we had been there the year before. We were coming back at the beginning. It was a short season from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and then the 3rd week of October was good, because that's the time when the leaves change. So, the second year we were coming back, the ranger was warning Nirguna, and he took one of his books, put it on a wall, rested it up, and he shot it. And then he handed it back to him. And he said, just remember what happened to this book. This could happen to anyone, not just the book. He threatened it. So we kept the book, which was great because later on we got to use it in a negotiation. What happened was they passed a law that we couldn't just wander around the parking lots of these various locations. So they told us that we can only have one space in the parking lot, and that space was at the far end of the parking lot. So nobody was coming past us, and we couldn't walk out of that space. But this is how Krishna works. All of a sudden, we realized in the Smoky Mountains, there's no vending machines, there's no any kind of commercial things. You can't buy a Coke there. You can't buy lemonade there. All there is water fountains. So what we did was, and everybody's really hot, and they're running to the bathrooms and coming back to their cars. So what we did is in that one space, we set up on our table with the books, but we also had ice cold lemonade, free. And so everybody would come over to the lemonade. And now we're distributing the books. Like we didn't miss a beat. But then what happened was that we had sued them that you're denying us the access to the majority of the people. I had come up with a lawsuit in Atlanta that showed that in Atlanta they were only allowing us in the lobby. And we did a traffic study that proved that you can't reach a majority of the people in the Atlanta airport by just being in the lobby, because it's not a point of destination. It is what they call it, it's a transit place. People fly from Birmingham to Charlotte, but they have to pass through Atlanta or wherever. So, but very few people are coming and going from Atlanta. So there's only 25% of the traffic, foot traffic, is in the lobby. 75% of it is out in the concourses. So we did a traffic study to prove that, and we won. So based with that precedent in the federal courts, and we got our booths out into the airport. And the rest of the devotees, like out in LA, BBT, they wanted free access. They didn't want to be limited to a booth. But I said, well, at least we're out there. We got a shot, and we got a majority of the people passing by us. So using that, we were able to then sue the Department of Interior, which is in charge of the national parks. And so, the department, the fellow in charge of that, he's a cabinet member, I don't remember his name. We had our lawyer and that book, and that was shot with a bullet. And that ranger, we asked for that ranger to be present. So this particular cabinet member, the Secretary of the Interior, was there. They knew that we had this new lawsuit that said that we have to be able to approach a majority of the traveling public. But also then, during the negotiation, our lawyer asked this ranger, he pulls out the book, and he passes it around to everybody there, all the officials, and they see the book. And so he says, Ranger so-and-so, do you recognize this book? He goes, yeah. And he goes, is that your bullet in this book? And he says, that's right. And the guy, Department of Interior, he's going, oh, God. No. And we had them. So they had to allow us to stay, they had to have top priority in the best part of the parking lot. And even to this day, people are distributing in the national parks because of that case. But so, in other words, Krishna, there were so many obstacles, but Krishna was giving the devotees all kinds of ideas and ways to overcome it. And it was so frustrating for the materialists who were trying to stop us. They did everything. Like in the Atlanta airport, they would be in the concourses with clickers. And it sounds crazy. These little clickers, they go click, yeah. And they would just, while you're doing the sale, they'd just be going click, 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 really annoying. And some of the brahmacharis, some of the men would get really annoyed. It was really, they were breaking up sales. You're trying to do your sale, and they try to break up sales. And if they tried to, stop them, then they would get arrested for verbal, they would call it a type of assault, a simple assault. Simple assault means that if I say something nasty to you and you feel threatened, I don't touch you, but I verbally assault you, I can be arrested for simple battery or simple assault. And this happened a lot. They were hitting us with that a lot. And we would say, no contest. We didn't say we were guilty. We didn't say we were innocent. We said, no contest, pay $100 and go back out. That was happening all the time. So, but those devotees, they have all my respect, those devotees that kept going out like that and, doing all these disguises and everything. I found it easier in the beginning just doing with no, just being like a devotee and talking to people. But, fortunately I got involved in another way by helping with the, legalizing various places. It wasn't me, it was Super Soul, and I just got a chance to be a part of it. And but the devotees that were doing it on the front line, they're a different breed. How they would go out and do this on a day-to-day basis. They're warriors. They're glorious. And but still book distribution is going on. I heard this devotee, this was at the Manor a while back. He's from Korea, South Korea. He's such a sweet devotee. He speaks so nicely. He's so But he was talking about how there's so few devotees, and we want to get books in everybody's houses. But then he said these books are mystical. What happens is, and then he shows this magazine, the most famous magazine that's in every house in Korea, every office, receptionist, lobby. There was 2 months in a row. First of all, the first one was the front cover of the Hare Krishna devotee, the beautiful article, and everyone's reading it. And then the next time is a major article in that same magazine glorifying Srila Prabhupada's books. And it's just, he says we don't have devotees, enough devotees to distribute to every town and village, but this magazine, Super Soul, Krishna fulfilled our desire to get a book in everyone's house, but through this magazine, by meeting one Buddhist monk who gave us his blessings. And therefore, the publishers of that magazine, have printed 2 beautiful articles about the devotees. Wow. In the older days, we would hear all these stories on a regular basis about how devotees would go out, and sometimes they're going out in situations where they're being rejected and the weather is so bad, yet they keep doing it, and then something miraculous happens, always. Or they meet people that, yes, I got this book once, or like with Laja here, so she's just sitting at that place, where is it? Is it Diamond Head or someplace like that on the coast? She goes to a flea market selling some jewelry she makes, and she has Bhagavad Gitas, and she's sold 10 in the last month or 2. And people, the stories were really quite like this man back in high school. He's 75 years old. In high school, I read about the Bhagavad Gita. I read part of the Bhagavad Gita. My whole life, I've been trying to find one, and now I see one. I want this Bhagavad Gita, and hands her $10 or $20. A woman, 3 years I've been looking for a Bhagavad Gita. She could have gone online. Somewhere or other, Krishna didn't show. She said, "No, I don't do those things. I don't do computers." And then she said, "I want this book. Here." And she gives the money. "I want to read the Bhagavad Gita." So, yeah, they have a life of their own. They're Krishna. They're incarnations of Krishna. We can worship the Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. If you don't have a deity or a picture, you put it on the altar, you worship the books. Like the Sikhs, they worship their scripture, the Grantha. That's their deity. So, yeah, and the only reason I brought it up is because, we've been talking about, it says in several of these things, and specifically in this one, actually I hadn't thought of it until just a moment ago after reading the verse, that the trees are meant for various sacrifices, and I thought, oh, yes, paper. The trees make paper for books. And so, that's part of the universal form. Anyway, I just thought I've been influenced. I've heard some really beautiful stories. I'm going to tell you that this morning I heard Dhananjaya Prabhu. This isn't about book distribution, but he had just gotten initiated, and Prabhupada told him what his name meant. And hold on a second. This is just a lighthearted thing. So he said that your name is Dhananjaya. It's a name for Indra, and it means great wealth. Or no, it's a name for Arjuna. Excuse me. It's a name for Arjuna. And he tells about. He said, there's money everywhere. It's flying here and there, and you just have to learn the art of catching the money. So, and he said, this is a name for Arjuna. When Maharaj Yudhishthira wanted to put on the Rajasuya Yajna, he didn't have enough wealth in the treasury. So he told Arjuna to go out and find gold. And he was able to he found out about there was a mountain of gold in the Himalayas from the Treta Yuga, when there was great amounts of gold, and they would have these big yajnas and all the paraphernalia for the fire hoses and everything was all made of gold. And as soon as they finished using it, they would just throw it away like we throw away a paper plate, So there was a mountain of gold, and he went and got that mountain of gold and brought it. So he was then called Dhananjaya. And then he said, Prabhupada said, that there is a mountain in the Himalayas, and the peak of that mountain is solid gold. So Dhananjaya, he's only been a devotee a few months, and maybe a few weeks, I'm not sure. Because on the first day he met Prabhupada, which is another fascinating story. It was 1969. Prabhupada had just come from Hamburg, Germany, and Prabhupada said that country, Kali Yuga, has really made great advancements in that country. And the devotees were asking Mukunda and Gurudas and Shamsundar, what do you mean, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, there's so much beauty there. And right in the center of the city of Hamburg, there's a slaughterhouse. Even to this day, there's a slaughterhouse right in the city. And you can hear the cries of the animals. And Prabhupada said, Kali Yuga is making so much progress. And so anyway, then they were staying at that time at John Lennon's house, Tittenhurst. And John Lennon had sent his chauffeur for Prabhupada with a nice big Rolls-Royce limousine. And for some reason, the devotees, when Prabhupada got into the limousine, they forgot to get in with him. And the driver just drove off with Prabhupada. And the three of them, Shamsundar, Mukunda, and Gurudas, why didn't you get in? I don't know, I thought you were getting in. So Prabhupada was going off to the John Lennon's house. He didn't know where to go when he got there. No kind of greeting. There was no other devotees there. John Lennon had given them 3 cottages on one part of the property. In the center was for Prabhupada. One side was the brahmacharis, the other side was for the grahastas. And I realized when he said that, that's what Prabhupada said about Atlanta in 1975 at the opening of Krishna Balaram. He said, I have just come from Atlanta, and once in the center they have Gaudi Thai, and one house is for brahmachari, they have another house on the left is for brahmachari, and one on the right is for grahastas. You should all go and see how they are dancing for Gaudi Thai. You would all be amazed. So, and I realized that was similar to the setup that they had at John Lennon's place. And they weren't in good shape, the buildings, and there was a lot of work to be done. But when they got to the, finally they caught up, they had a smaller car. They finally caught up, and Prabhupada was standing at the gate. All the chauffeur knew was he was to deliver him to the property, to the front gate. And so Prabhupada was standing there with his luggage at the front gate, very calmly, not upset, not angry. And, he was standing there for about 4 or 5 minutes by himself. And then they took care of everything. So then they had a program, and I don't know if it was the same day or not, but Prabhupada spoke for about an hour. And Dhananjaya, Prabhu, he said, I couldn't really listen or concentrate on the lecture because I had one question in my mind that I needed to ask Prabhupada. And he'd only been a devotee for a short time, and this is his first time seeing Prabhupada. And so the whole time Prabhupada's speaking, he wasn't really listening. He was just thinking about, when he finishes, I'm going to ask this question. And so the lecturer answers, and he says, any questions? And he immediately raises his hand. And so he asks his question. And his question is, when can I get initiated? And Prabhupada said, well, we will see about that. And then there's a whole another long story about, because it was the appropriate things that, because, Prabhu was saying that the guru is supposed to observe the disciple, and then we're all supposed to observe the guru to see if this is the right guru for me. And so, anyway, that's another whole long story. But so Prabhupada said that there's a mountain in the Himalayas with the peak is solid gold. So he's planning in his mind, I'm going to go there with a little pick, find that mountain and start getting some money, because we were really broke in those days in London. So I could go get some of this gold. So he asked Prabhupada on a morning walk, he says, Prabhupada, so this, you said there's a mountain with a peak of gold in the Himalayas? He goes, yes. He said, do you know where it is? And he says, yes. Can you tell me? No. And he said, well, why not? First of all, Prabhupada says, well, why do you want to know? And he said, well, I thought we need money. I thought I could go there and get some gold. And he was, well, why can't I? He said, first of all, it will create too much controversy. And he never really understood that, but he thought, well, because the Himalayas border China, India and China, that's a border, and there had been a lot of, there had been a war around that time with China and India. Many people have forgotten about it, but they were at war.
Twice.
So it could happen again. And they talk about it all the time. And so he never found out where it was. But then Prabhupada said to him, he said, better you think about how to make devotees. That is the more valuable than any amount of gold. And he said, Dhananjaya was musing about that. He was saying that this was this morning he was speaking, and he said, making a devotee is so much harder. It takes so much more work. And then how to keep them, help them, So, but that was Prabhupada's emphasis. It was about getting this knowledge out in the form of these books, and then the mantra, public chanting, distributing that sound vibration, prasadam distribution, and helping people to come to Krishna consciousness, saving souls. That was Prabhupada's mission. That is our mission. At least to save ourselves anyway. So, what was that? But I want to just mention this. There's one devotee in Atlanta. When I first was sent to Atlanta, I didn't want to be there, and I was very upset about it. But anyway, I surrendered to it eventually. But within about 2 or 3 days of being there, all of a sudden, Chardesha, his name was Charles Williams, he shows up. And it was like, and he's talking to this friend of mine, Jagat Jivan, and he's asking us, what do you think? Do you think I should stay here? I'm going, I think so, yeah. Really? Yeah, I think so, yeah. Because he had this place in North Carolina, and he had a teepee there, and he was into this spiritual thing that he was doing. But he could see this was also good. But he just showed up right after we came, and he immediately understood book distribution. It was incredible. He just knew where to go, what to do, how to do it. We immediately put him in charge of Sankirtan. We were initiated. He was just in for a few days, barely knew the philosophy, but he knew book distribution. And I can tell you that at one point when he finally achieved something that no other devotee had done up to that point, which is he distributed 200 big books in one day. And Prabhupada said that he has distributed 200 books in one day is simply wonderful. And then he also said, and he is simply wonderful. And but I used to study him, because what he would do, he would take one day off, and then that day do the morning program, and he would go out with headphones. We didn't have the Walkmans then. And he would go out and walk and listen to lectures all day and kirtans, bhajans all day. He was like a warrior, like just getting prepared for battle. He'd get so totally absorbed in transcendental sound vibration. Then that next day he was up and out, right after Mangalarati, and got his rounds done before, and was out and would stay all day, all night, and set a goal for himself. It was like watching a very disciplined warrior going out to do battle. It was really, I felt fortunate to have his association.
Who's that Prabhu at now?
He's still in Atlanta. He lives in Atlanta somewhere.
We met him. He was there.
He comes to the Bhagavatam Festival. He comes to the temple Sunday feast occasionally. His health is not very good. He's not very.
I saw him at the Sunday feast
You
saying
did?
that.
Yeah, he comes to the. He stays. Yeah, he's very quiet. He stays off to the side. But his health is. He's had some health issues, but he's.
He wrote a book too.
Yeah, he did.
You talking about
Yeah.
Charvation?
Charvation.
Yeah, the real tall black body.
Yeah.
He wrote an interesting book on
Race.
yes.
That was very interesting. Yeah, he's a very interesting personality. So, anyway, there's lots of devotees though that did so, and like Nirguna and Hamsagati. Everybody wanted to be a big book distributor. In those days it was all about the big book distributors. But there was the small books and the BTG distributors. But there was there was the whole thing about the element of getting your name on the newsletter. But there were some devotees that just didn't. And Nirguna and Hamsagati, both of them very small in stature, probably about 5'4", and I used to call them the 2 Kumars because they looked like 2 young boys. They never seemed to age. And although I saw Hamsagati recently, and he has aged, but Nirguna passed away back around 2006 or 2007. They would just go out and do small books, and they were amazing. But they could do so many. They were out in the van, and they just lived out there, and they would just. But like Nirguna did do big books up in the Smokies, but otherwise, and during the regular year, they would just go out and do the smaller books and back to Godheads, and they were expert at it, and they were dedicated to it. They did so well. It was really a joy to have them as your godbrothers. So, yeah. So, yeah. And there was like Parampara. He's another one.
Mm-hmm.
The way he would distribute in downtown Gatlinburg, which was really difficult because the Christians would really, they were awful. And he would just avoid all of that by doing a different time of day as everyone else. And he was just so stoic about this whole approach to it, very disciplined. All of these distributors, some of them were very flamboyant, but there was a lot of discipline involved. And now you see the devotee like Vaisheshika now, he's lived the life. Prabhupada was always saying, don't just be selling these books, you have to read these books. You see Vaisheshika, he's just like he's giving these classes and he's quoting from every one of Prabhupada's books, Sanskrit, boom, everything. And he has all of his students there, and they're all studying and learning Prabhupada's books. He teaches them, he gives them a discipline on how many pages a day that you can finally read the Bhagavatam in 5 years, and they're all learning verses. I saw the other day, we had 5-year-old children standing up at the beginning of a program, and they were doing Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo Mattak Sarvam Vattate. They did those 3 verses. Tesham Satatam Yuktanam Ratatam Piktipurvikam Dhami Bhuti Yogatam. And they were so adorable. I saw Vidura do that as well, but still, it's really sweet to see it. But so he's still distributing books. He's teaching them all on how to distribute books. Weekend warriors. And they did the last few years. They gave $500,000 to the BBT. Only 2 other places, one in Delhi and one other place in India, did that amount in books. So, he's been doing this. I remember he was in 1975. He was in Atlanta.
In Silicon Valley, right?
He's in Silicon Valley, yeah. Mm-hmm. But he's teaching people how to distribute books and how to read Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada said, if you want to be with me, read my books. These books are my words that I would say if you were talking to me or if you were listening to my class. So just read my books and you will be with me. But so we get a chance to give them to other people as well. Anyway, it's a Christmas marathon, and it's also the materialist marathon. Avoid Walmart. There you go.
Thank you very much. God bless you.